morning. Thank you, all of you, for joining us today in this important conference, which looks at a topic extremely close to my heart, citizen centricity. And thank you, panel members, for making the time to be with us today and coming all this way. Before we start our discussion, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about some perspectives. The first one is citizens' centricity, or putting citizens first, could be looked through many different lenses. One lens is to look at it from a much broader perspective. 3 different environments: the service environment, the living environment, and the regulatory environment. As governments have a responsibility for the holistic experience of citizens, not just one area. Most of all, we've been focusing on how we can improve experience with services. But the area that we most use on a day-to-day basis is the living environment. That's the one which affects us: the roads, the environment itself, and also the recreational spaces, the security. But in terms of our conference today, the focus is about the service environment. There are 3 key things around a service environment when we look from a citizen perspective that citizens are looking for governments, is to simplify how you deliver services. That means potentially looking at service delivery from 3 different lenses. A single brand, which makes it simple for accessing and knowing where to go for government services, so you don't need to think about 20 or 30 different organizations. An omni-channel experience, which looks at the experience you're going to have with the whole access to services, whether it's digital, whether it's physical. Digital first is important, but not only. A huge part of our population is not digital literate or don't have access. And number 3 is moving towards life-centric services, which is much more focused around how to connect different government services together around a particular need of starting a business or getting married. Easier said than done. Through the day, we will focus on 4 areas that will help us to explore how we can move towards this direction. There will be sessions on program governance and finance, on data and analytics, technologies, and culture and capabilities, extremely important. Before starting the discussion, I would like to show a small video which actually brings to life how important collaboration is, how all governments around the world can play a role in bridging the gap that other nations have in service delivery, how to improve service delivery through collaboration, sharing of knowledge, experience, and ideas.
Today, millions of people around the world continue to suffer in poverty.
Wereldwijde ongelijkheid heeft een ongelijk speelveld gecreëerd.
जहां पर हर देश अपनी क्षमता पर पहुंचने के लिए संघर्ष कर रहे हैं.
Kama serikali zote zingekuwa na teknolojia sawa, tungemaliza shida hii.
Fortsatt det mulig å revolusjonere samfunnet.
Data and technology will enable governments to bring healthcare to more people.
扩大接受教育的机会，和帮助我们建立更美好生活的机会。
Să întrețină comunități coerente, în care toți avem șansa de a ne realiza visele și să dăm oamenilor o voce pentru ceea ce contează.
En achevant ce parcours ensemble,
Inci qua inci,
settore pubblico e privato.
हमारे लिए कोई भी चुनौती बड़ी नहीं है.
Porque mejores gobiernos significa avanzar hacia un mundo libre de pobreza.
更接近共享繁荣
og et bedre liv for verdens innbyggere.
So, Join us.
加入我们，
Ungana nasi.
हमारे साथ जुड़ें।
Och sätt folk först.
So let's start today with the first question. Why do we believe that more than ever governments today need to put citizens first? If I can start with you, Jessica.
I think in the UK, in 2010, we launched gov.uk. And for the first time, that changed the way that we presented content and services for users. We didn't put everything in the order that government departments in the UK deliver those services. We started putting the content together in the way that users needed to consume it. And we found that it's far more successful to deliver services that way. Users choose digital when you build the services better that way. And we've kind of moved beyond that now, even to the point where we can use the data that we understand about what users access on gov.uk to design services across departments. So you can use the digital as a disruptive horizontal in this world of vertical departments.
Thank you. Rono, you have a passion for this area, and the World Bank is obviously driving a lot of the agenda in this space. Keen to hear your views on why it's important and how our government's doing it today.
Thanks very much, Mohammed, and good morning, salam alaikum to all of you. Indeed, I just think that it's never been more urgent for governments to be citizen-focused, and I would even say people-focused, because it's not just about citizens, it's also about refugees and internally displaced people, and it's people who don't have citizenship but who are present in a country. And why is that the case? I think there are at least a couple of reasons why it's taken a particular urgency. The first one is that there is a crisis of trust in governments around the world. If you look at the polls on whether people trust big institutions, governments, trade unions, large organizations, corporations, over the medium term, the level of trust in institutions, and in particular in the government, has gone down. And you see the resurgence of populism around the world. You see it in many countries around the world: extremism, terrorism, populism, these plagues that are threatening world prosperity and stability. And one of the key drivers of that lack of trust is the feeling that a lot of people have that governments are not here to serve them, but that people in government are here to serve themselves. And that needs to be turned around. We need to reintroduce the culture of trust, one that is based on responsiveness and delivery, one that is based also on transparency and being very clear and simple in how you access services and on what basis. So I think that trust element is important. And the second element that is really critical is that people are observing the pace of technological change. We heard yesterday from our keynote speaker about the exponential pace of technological change and how it's affecting society, how now society and the internet are becoming commingled, how it's one and the same. And of course, that is also changing the perception that, and the expectations that citizens have. So people are connected in their everyday life to this device, right? They're getting services from their smart devices, whether it's purchasing a book, getting a movie, or booking their next holiday. They expect governments to be able to follow suit, and that requires governments to be much more user-focused.
Thank you. Adil, if you allow me to come to you, would be great if you can share some views on why you believe governments should focus on citizens.
Okay. If we see a couple of years ago, and the government across the world, they are continuing putting effort for the digital transformation agenda. And also the agency inside this government is competing to deliver e-services and digital services to the citizen. However, especially nowadays on the digital era, the citizen expectation has been very high, and the government is barely reaching that. I think the citizen is looking to the government, to agile government, dynamic, fast government that can respond fastly to the citizen need. And to have that, I think the government across the world should focus on three main things. Number one, which is one government, in front end and back end. In front end, that means regardless who's producing the service to the citizen, it should be the same. It should be one face. And in the back end, we are expecting the government to be collaborative and connected and having exchanging for information and data across the government. So this is one thing. Second thing, which is about the citizen experience. The citizen today is looking after a fast, flexible, and even a customized service for his need that serves even the status of his life. So the government should look on that very focused area. And I think yesterday we have an example from our speaker yesterday, and he mentioned that how the Sweden government eased the payment for the tax and how might make that very easy for the citizen to pay the tax. The third thing, which is about the Omni Channel. Now, regardless if the citizen will use the app, if he will use kayaks, if he will go to or visit a service center, he should have the same experience across the world. So I think this is the main agenda that should be put in mind on the government, and this is three main pillars if any digital government wanted to build a digital government strategy.
Great, thank you. If you may, the same question from you.
So, thanks first for having me here. If I look at the average user experience of products that's available for citizens in general, citizens expect the same kind of quality from their government already. And if, I mean, you email your government that you've lost your bicycle, and the government will say that they will get back to you in 90 days, then that's not what we expect, calling Uber in a matter of 2 minutes. So we have to keep the pace, and it's possible. Technological innovation is possible the same way as it's possible in private sector, in public sector. The question is just that if we are a bit lazy sometimes, or we are used to this status quo, I think it's time to break it. And I think that as time progresses, governments are going to compete for talent. And the governments that go with the change will get the talent. The governments who won't will lose the talent. I think that's where we're going.
Michael, if I can ask you to answer the same question.
Well, I'd like to follow up on what the previous speakers have said, but first of all, thank you very much for having me, and it's a great honor to be part of this conference. I think it is true that governments are not as competitive. If you look at the private sector, the technological competition allows for products and services to be delivered so quickly, and the governments have been slow. And given the rise in inequality and in different parts of the world, we couple this with the issue of trust, which was mentioned in the past. So we have a unique opportunity to use technology to foster this trust and to allow citizens to have the same kind of services that he or she expects from the private sector. And those services have to be delivered proactively, fast, very efficiently, and governments have to understand that the competition is not just in the private sector, but also in the public sector as well.
Thank you. One of the challenges when I was discussing with all of you, and similar kind of areas have been highlighted, that when you are trying to move to a more citizen-centric government, working within the constraints of the government as it is, the processes, the procedures, the rules, everything that exists, is not necessarily very citizen-centric. And I know, Jessica, we were talking about GDS's example in the UK, and you took a very particular direction almost 10 years ago, which was unique from a UK perspective. Can you share with us why that was done and what was the benefit of that approach?
Yeah, I think one of the key things is that in 2010, when GDS was established, there was no central person inside of government who had responsibility for digital. The user expectation, the demands that they had were, internet was everywhere. In all of their private sector dealings, they were able to kind of request services online, except in government. And there was a recognition amongst the government at the time and the politicians just following a recent election that something had to change. So they gave agency to a specific minister, and they established GDS partially to kind of force a disruption in the way that service delivery was being done at the time. And I think it's been very effective, because I think the way that you have to, the skills and the capabilities that you have to establish in departments, there's a huge amount of upfront learning that everyone had to do. So in addition to there being a central agency and a central minister responsible for digital, we also created digital leaders inside of every department who would work with GDS to make sure that all of their strategies were incorporating digital from the ground up.
So one of the things which is coming across to me, and you were mentioning earlier, that other than, of course, the technology component, the people component was quite important, and creating new career paths for the people that are required to work within government for this kind of services. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that particular part?
Yeah, we've established what we call job families. I think we have another session on this later, but I'll touch on it now. I think there's 40-something, 46 maybe, job families, and we call them job families rather than roles, because it's not so much just about recognizing product managers and delivery managers and designers. It's more around doing that, making sure that we have the pay right, but also recognizing that they need career progression in order to be attracted into government. So it establishes roles at different levels all the way up through government, so you can see how you, as a practitioner in design, for example, could one day be a director in charge of a whole product team.
Rano, if you, on the similar kind of area, which we're talking about collaboration and how it's important in governments to look at, and I'm talking within government, not across boundaries yet. And you had a particular view on that. Keen to hear, and I'm sure the audience would.
Yes, no, I'll just pick up where Jessica left off, really, which is that, okay, so the game is changing with the advent of technology in the public sector. There are a few things that are changing. The first and the most important one is that this is not a ministry by ministry agenda. It is not a Ministry of Education or a Ministry of Health or a Ministry of Defense or Ministry of Interior agenda. It cannot be. It has to be a whole of government agenda. And that changes the game completely, because it means that if it's a whole of government agenda, there needs to be some coordination mechanism, which will differ from country to country. So in the UK, the Cabinet Office is central, and GDS reports through that chain. In other countries, it's the Ministry of ICT, which is changing role in that process. I mean, I was talking to the Minister of ICT of Tunisia recently, and his role is changing very significantly. You know, from minister in charge of posts and telecommunications 20 years ago, to Minister of ICT looking at the overall sector and broadband and telecoms 5 or 10 years ago, to minister that also is leading digital transformation today. This is a huge evolution in the function. And it's one that needs to be thought through very carefully. in terms of how it connects with other center of government functions. So in the same way that Jessica was talking about the IT function, which is a cross-cutting function that needs to operate across government, you also need to think about your procurement function. You need to think about your HR function. You need to think about your legal function. You need to think sometimes about your economist function. And so whatever you do in IT needs to be consistent with how you're thinking about these cross-cutting functions that need to operate across the whole of government. So we see a really important agenda in terms of connecting the digital transformation coordination mechanisms with the broader issues of cross-ministerial working also between the national and the subnational levels, because you have a whole agenda on smart cities that needs to be connected to what's happening at the national level. And then also bringing in this issue of innovation and change. You know, the current structures of government are inherited from the 19th century all the way to the Middle Ages, right? So you have layers upon layers, you know, from the Ottoman Empire to, you know, the various colonial powers to whatever, legal traditions. You have layers and layers of all this Weberian approach to bureaucracy, you know? And on the one hand, you have this disruption that you mentioned of technology. And so the key challenge for all of us is how do you leverage that technology as a means to an end, as a means to disruption and to bringing out innovation into the public sector?
So in essence, not technology for technology's sake, but to be driven by some kind of purpose. Adil, I know you were talking about earlier when we were chatting, some amazing transformation that is taking place in Saudi at a very high level, but also you were particularly talking about the whole service delivery side of things. I'll be keen for you to share some of the thoughts on that and what is happening and any challenges you think governments need to keep in mind once they're going about this.
Actually, the journey of e-transformation in the kingdom started from 2005. And we try at the central government and at Yasser e-government to baseline and the transformation, to build the capability inside the government agency, to do the change management, to change the mindset of the people and how they are seeing the citizen and seeing the beneficiaries, and also enable them with the different technology and standards and policy that will help them to have a safe, let's say, journey in e-transformation. And luckily, we did a great job as a whole of the government. But let's say from 2 years and coming to today, we need to change a bit the focus. As my colleague said, that it is not anymore agenda of the Ministry of Education, of the agenda of the Ministry of Interior. It should be, the thinking should be in the whole of the government. How can all the government collaborative and help the citizen to realize the benefit of dealing with the government and ease the life of the citizen. So for that, it has been issued a national committee headed by the Ministry of Communication and IT. And this committee has a member from all big and main ministry in the government, and they are heading the agenda of the digital transformation in the country, and that will make let's say, the direction and the shape of the digital transformation in the government.
Okay. In Estonia, the one principle around give me your data once, a very simple principle, but I think has had a huge impact. And in my opinion, has been the key driver of how you've achieved a lot in Estonia from a digital and citizen-centric government perspective. It'd be good to hear about the good side, what was the benefits, but also how difficult or easy was it to implement that? Because data tends to be a major challenge and discussion area across all government organizations.
Indeed. I don't want to focus too much on Estonia, but there is this principle of giving your data once, which means that if, for example, for some reason I have already registered for, I don't know, a service, the government knows my address, knows the name of my child and the birth date, why should I give it to them every time I want to use a new service? So they have this data in their systems. Why not to share it between the different government organizations is the idea of data once principle. The implementation definitely has not been easy because different government organizations are all siloed in different kind of their own databases, and to share this kind of this information, we have this pretty little thing called the X road, which is basically one big highway that is connected to smaller roads. It is a data sharing platform. But I think what you first need is the trust of the citizens. This is the most important part. If the citizens do not trust the government with the data, this is already a failed mission. We can see that in some of the bigger countries where there have been data breaches by the government, and citizens do not trust their government with the data anymore. Unfortunately, this does not pursue good innovation. In Estonia, we haven't had any data breaches yet. There might be some in the future, you can never say, but you need this citizen-centric approach to trust your government. That is the key.
But in your case, you've taken a kind of decentralized view of how to manage that. So it's not centralizing all data.
It hasn't been like this always. It was definitely centralized some time ago. But you need to share the data between different government institutions. For example, if I break my leg and the ambulance is coming to get me, I would very much like that the ambulance already know what is my blood type and if I have any allergies. And also if I'm already in the ambulance car being transported to the hospital, I would like the hospital to be prepared to know what kind of treatment I should get. And in order for this data sequence to go through, they need, you know, this common identifier known as, I don't know, a personal code or a name, and they need to share this information between the platforms. So this is the end result.
Yeah, great. Mikhail, you are quite an advocate of looking for not governments to do it on their own and to look at sharing and collaborating. Keen to hear your views on why you believe that is so important.
It's a good question. I think that we just look across the world and see experiences where public and private providers can collaborate on citizen services. Because if you think about life situations like a birth of a child or education, there is not just the government that's involved. You often need private providers. For instance, you're buying a car, you're thinking about insurance. It's not about just registration or licensing. You're thinking about spare parts. And why not make the whole life cycle complete? I mean, that's kind of the thinking of the future of services, where the citizen doesn't really differentiate between the government and the private sector. I mean, it's an app, and if, you know, it's sort of both the private provider and the public provider can proactively say, well, here's the kind of services we can give you. I think that's the kind of the future standard where, you know, the government is up to speed to the private sector, because often, you know, you do get ads from Facebook or other services that you leave your trace online and the company's tracking you and offering different services. I mean, in a way, if the government manages data well, it knows when you're turning 17, 18, and going to the university. Maybe it can provide you with some opportunities for scholarships and things like that. Yeah, that's my vision. So the whole life cycle of a service, life cycle of a citizen is not just, you know, do not divide it between the private and the public. It's both.
It's the fusion of the two. Sorry, you have.
I wanted to reflect on what Michael was just saying, a couple of thoughts on that. The first one is that there are some governments that are moving already in that direction. So I understand that in the UAE, for instance, in Dubai in particular, precisely on this service, the car purchase service, so there is the development of an app that provides you both with the title for the vehicle when you purchase it, but also options for insurance. So you work with the private sector so that in your app you have both the public service and some opportunities for private service provision, and then you have a PPP arrangement between the two to make sure that the data is shared appropriately and managed properly. And that takes me to my second point, which is maybe a bit more provocative. But so we've been talking quite a bit, and we also say the same thing often about making sure that governments are not left behind, right, by the pace of technology and by the pace of the private sector. And it's very true. I mean, it's something that we all experience in our daily lives wherever we live. I would posit that we need to be more ambitious than that. I think that the government has the potential to lead the way in some respects. Let me give a couple of respects. One of them is in terms of the stewardship of the data and the quality of the regulatory environment in which that data is held. There is something going on around the world, which is the tech clash, a backlash against technology. That is happening. It's happening in relation to big social media companies. There have been major breaches. What you mentioned in Estonia has never had breaches. Well, you know what? There's been Cambridge Analytica. There have been other breaches in the private sector, a number of them. And so consumers and citizens are the same people. They're just two sides of the same coin. And so consumers are getting concerned about tax evasion, or the fact that a lot of big companies are not paying their dues when it comes to digital-based taxation. And they're concerned about privacy increasingly, and about the way in which data is managed. And so governments have the opportunity to do two things. One, to move to a predictive service delivery model, which is at least as good as, if not better, than what Amazon or Netflix or anybody else or on YouTube can do, which is doing exactly what Jessica was saying, using the data that you have already, and governments have a wealth of data about individuals, to enrich the data set that corresponds to you as an individual, and on the basis of that, propose some services proactively, right? Rather than being reactive, just anticipating, oh, your baby's born, well, we know that in a few weeks you're going to need vaccination, we know that in a few months you're going to need a creche or a kindergarten, and we know that in 3 years you'll need a school, etc. We already know that the day your child is born. Well, we can work around that. But then the other thing that the government can do is hold itself to very high standards in terms of data protection, in terms of ethics in the use of artificial intelligence, and in terms of being a good steward of the information that the public puts at its disposal.
A very important point you make, and I think extremely difficult one to manage. And I'm going to take the bridge there from a technology. You just introduced AI into the mix. Keen to hear your perspectives on, and if I can start maybe with Adil, what's the thinking right now in Saudi government from a service delivery perspective to leverage technologies like AI, blockchain, IoT, etc.?
Let me start with the data, okay? We all agree that the data is the new oil, and there is a lot of government agency data available. What we have done on the kingdom, we build an enterprise bus that facilitates the integration and the movement of the data across the government agency. And we've been successful in doing that, and really that facilitate the service delivery for the citizen and from the service provider from different government agency. I think this is the time to take it uplift again and concentrate on this data and build what we call a citizen genome that really will help to identify the status of the citizen and provide the right service for him. We can build a lot of service on that. We can really detect that he already have a child, so we will issue a birth certificate for him. We can even take it more and build, let's say, a work profile, something like a LinkedIn for the citizen, and introduce the AI to do the job matching for him. So there is a lot of things. Even we can introduce it on the medical and having a medical prescription or medical recommendation for the citizen if he's ill or facing a lot. So really, if we wanted to go to the emerging technology, talking about AI or blockchain or whatever, the baseline is the data. If we don't have the data that really can build the profile for each one and the status of him, then we will not be able to provide these kind of services.
Mikhail, and I know you guys are doing an amazing amount of work in terms of analytics and helping decision making. Is AI coming into the play there?
It does, but I just wanted to follow up and say that I completely agree with your perspective. I think the priority for us as well is to have good data, and we have a project called National System of Data Management, which is set to make sure that all the data that's collected is well managed and it can be trusted. Because if you don't have good data, you can use AI or whatever else, predictive analytics. There are some pilot projects on artificial intelligence using blockchain in terms of in land registries and things like that. But I think our first priority is really data and making sure that it's trustworthy.
Jessica, from your perspective, in GDS and particularly, is there a lot of usage now of AI?
Yeah, we use a bit of AI and some machine learning on gov.uk. For example, there's so much content on gov.uk, and it was particularly difficult to tag all of it. So we use machine learning to help us get this long tail of content on the website tagged up. But I think our focus, and particularly mine, is that I don't like to approach it from, oh, there's a nice shiny solution, how can we apply it inside of our business? I think you still have to keep focusing on what problem you're trying to solve and whether or not any of these things are part of the solution to that problem, and keep everyone's attention on the problem rather than looking for ways to force in the use of a particular technology where it may or may not work. I think the other really important point is that government has a massive role to play in this space, and it might not be about just adopting an existing technology. We can aggregate demand and the might of government and the weight of all of the citizens to tilt those technologies more in the direction that we want them to be in. So we can set standards and say, we're only buying things that meet these standards. We can set up frameworks so that markets have to emerge because the thing that's available to us maybe doesn't meet our needs or isn't aligned with our ethics. And I think that's a really useful place to focus government's technology, and it's where we should be leading, setting the rules and explaining to the market what we expect, and then having them respond to our needs, and us using all of those different parts of government. It's one of the things that I've been doing in gov.uk Verify, which is our EID system in the UK. When we first launched that, the first thing we did was write standards. The second thing we did was establish a framework so that we could tell the market what we wanted to buy because we didn't like what was out there. So you don't have to adopt what's there. You can change it so that it meets your needs as government.
Ott, from your experience, either in Estonia or beyond, how do you see AI and machine learning or any other?
Definitely the future. We are pursuing some legislative innovations in Estonia we call it the CRAT law, which is basically a robot law, because you need a legally permissive environment before you can actually make innovations. The same for digital identity, the same for robotics or machine learning. To give these machines actual meaning, you have to have laws that govern them in the first hand. And we've been testing with self-driving cars, and and making one of the biggest, the main highway roads in Tallinn central town as a test bed for these machines.
Great. Let me turn to the Omni Channel experience for a bit. We all touched on it. And in a world where everything is becoming digitized, it seems to be still a need for physical channels, whether it's a service center or a contact center. I know, Mikhail, you, in Russia, you've taken that approach. You've not just gone digital. Keen to hear why and what's been the experience behind that.
Well, I'll just provide you a bit of a context. Both my colleague from Estonia and I are coming from the Soviet experience where the government was anything but citizen-centric. It was government-centric. So there were no service standards, there were really no quality evaluations, and the first thing in the early 2000s was to build front office that's friendly and remove the back office, make sure that citizens get good services when they come and they don't have to go to different agencies, they come to one particular sector. So what we built, what we call multifunctional service centers, there are about 2,800 of them across Russia. Why so many? Well, Russia is big. As you know, there are 9 time zones, 85 regions, so about 97% of the populations have access to them. So that was the first step to improving citizen-centric approach, because really trust is built when you get good services. In fact, it's a good question for discussion whether removing direct interaction with the government actually is helping trust and not helping trust. Because if you remove the government, I mean, who the citizens are going to trust? Just their app. So for us, it's important to keep those multifunctional service centers working, and they're working well. The satisfaction is above 90% because people get services fast, and to slowly introduce digital. Because not everyone is digital savvy. There's an older population that's easier for them to come in and receive physical services. So we're going to phase them out, but it's going to be a slow process.
If I could follow up on that quickly, in Estonia we have 99% of services online. So there are few things that you can't do online, like buying property or getting married. But the basis for this is also, we have a joke in Estonia that 50% of Estonia is covered in forest, and Estonians do not like to talk to other people too much. So that's why we had to put government services online, and that people wouldn't have to go to government office. Plus, we were very poor after the Soviet Union collapse, so we didn't have much other choice.
I'd like to get your perspective, because you take a much broader view of the world.
Yes.
And I think Estonia is a great example where it worked well because they had a very digital literate population.
Yes. No, it's something that we've been doing quite a lot of thinking about. Citizen service centers, how to get them right, what's the strategy, and a couple of things on that. So the first is that we take the digital divide very seriously. So in all of the operations and projects that we do around the world that lead towards digital transformation, one of our baselines is to look at, okay, what is the poverty profile of people who are accessing services digitally or non-digitally today? Who are the excluded part of the population? Who are the people who are having a hard time accessing? Is it disabled people? Is it people living in a particular region that's remote? Is it people who live in the city but have very low income, etc.? Is it women more than men? So that's a really critical dimension to anything we do on digital services, is first to find out what is the inequality that we are facing from day one, even before digitization. And then the second thing that we do is to say, okay, let's hold ourselves to a higher standard. It's not just about making sure that no one is left behind when you move to digital. It's actually using digital as a way to address inequality and to reduce these issues with access. So for instance, we're working on a project in Tunisia right now, a GovTech project to move towards digitization in the education sector. What we're going to do is we're going to connect schools around the country, and not just those schools that are in areas where there is broadband connectivity, but also bring in the private sector to provide connectivity in those areas where there isn't connectivity, and then use that as a platform to develop other services from there, and to focus on those marginalized people who are having a harder time. So you can also think of using technology to address disability, for instance. There are many disabilities that, for instance, people who are blind, people who have issues with hearing. There are many technologies now that can help actually overcome disability. And they need to be harnessed very deliberately and explicitly in order to address the device. So that's the first point. The second point is that I really liked what you were saying, Jessica, about the government not being just a market taker, but potentially a market maker as well. And that is something that we collectively have to think about. So think of the might of the UK government in the UK market in terms of setting standards and setting expectations of what the private sector should deliver. But then shift your perspective and think of a coalition of governments, not just UK, but also Estonia, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, Vietnam. All of these countries coming together, either through, the G20 would be one forum, but also the GovTech partnership could be another. All these countries coming together, talking to the industry with one voice and saying, hey, here's a standard that we would like you to meet. Here's an experience that we would like people to have that they don't have yet. Work it out. Go out there, private sector, innovate, make it happen. And these are things that we will tolerate. These are things that we will not tolerate. Open standards, and open source. I think that there is real potential for coming together and increasing the market power of government as a purchaser by coming and as a source of innovation by coming together.
Jessica, in the UK, are you experimenting or thinking about whether the physical channels should still exist and whether that's an area of topic of discussion or debate right now?
Yeah, it has been since the beginning. I think the approach that we took was sort of modeled on private sector, really, which was the idea that if you build a digital service so good that people prefer to use it, then you can separate out the people who have a preference for physical versus the people who genuinely really are going to struggle to interact digitally. And I think we do a lot of segmentation to understand the difference between those two things, because you use different solutions for different situations. So it could be that the person just doesn't have access to the technology, but they understand it really well. So that's one set of solutions for that type of person. And again, as you say, it could be someone who has accessibility needs. So we build accessibility into all of our service design in the UK. We have an accessibility lab that all the services come in and are tested in. And I think you have to just make sure that you're following the right approach for the right problem. It's not one thing. It's not digital or not digital. It's why is it not digital? And what are the interventions that we can put in place in order to help the most people be online?
So a question now, and if I can have everyone maybe reflect very shortly on this, and then we'll move on to getting questions from you guys as well. So we're talking about citizen centricity and being user-centric or citizen-centric. Keen to hear how practically are you bringing citizens into the picture, whether it's in the design of services or making decisions on policies or any of. So what role is GDS or your governments playing in, for example, getting them involved in that process? Keen to hear, if I can start with you.
Yeah, there's a few different answers to that. I think one of the most fundamental ones is that inside of GDS we run the process of service assessments. So all digital services have to go through this assessment process, and we've developed design principles as part of going through that assessment and a manual telling all government employees, here's how to design a good service. And a fundamental part of that is user research. So we bring actual people in, or we go and visit them and test the actual product in the situation that the user is consuming the service. And that helps us make sure that we're focusing on user needs, not departmental needs, that we're looking for opportunities where you're not just designing around a single transaction, like a user wanting, we have a service where you can apply for a provisional driver's license. But that's just a micro part in a goal that a person has of wanting to learn to drive. And some of those things are online and some of those things are offline. But really to design a really excellent set of services there and cutting across all of the different sort of verticals in government, you really have to look at the overall goal of the user.
Okay. Adil, if I may?
Yeah. If we look at Saudi, we have two approach or to think. The first one, which is having the policy and the standard, and make sure that all government agencies comply with the digital services standard across the board. Today we have a very high maturity service, but however it's not connected. So our job first is to have these policy and standard and make sure that all the government agencies comply with that. The second thing, which is the enablement and shifting the thinking a bit. So we need to think with our colleague in the government agency about life-centric services, life experience. For example, starting a business, getting married. So the citizen today, he does not care about who's offering this service. We have all of these services, which is separated as already digital, but the thing how we can make it in one journey. So for that, we are building a digital service and experience hub to collect all the government agency in one place and one lab to design a service wearing the hat of the citizen. So regardless who's offering what, no, let's think about the journey for the citizen by starting a business, and helping, and not even just give him a permit or give him a certificate. No, let's put ourselves on the citizen's shoe and see how he will start the business, starting from thinking, starting from the location, starting from bringing a different data from different government agency to help him. If he wanted to open a restaurant, then we need to help him as a government and say, this is not a good spot for the restaurant. You need to go to that spot is better for you, based on the information that we have. So that kind of thinking is where we are pushing the government agency to do.
Yeah, great. Mikhail?
There are three ways we involve citizens. First, as the UK experience, we do, when we think about services, start with the end user experience, and in design labs actually look at how the service will look at the very end, not from how the government wants to design it. First thing. Second is the approach to using web portals to get citizens immediate feedback on quality of service provision. It's very popular in the cities. City of Moscow have a service called Active Citizen, where citizens can take a picture of a problem, and the government has to respond quicker than it would be under traditional channels. And actually, if there is a pothole, they would have to send a picture of a filled pothole within a week. And so the citizens see the immediate response. And also, a third way is co-designing services, actually using digital platforms to come up together with solutions with the government. We haven't discussed this much. We think about citizens more of as a passive recipients of government service, but also, next discussion or whatever else we do has to be also involving citizens in designing government programs using digital
So moving to crowd designing.
Exactly.
Ott?
Similar approach I've always implemented in my projects. I like hackathons, so I like the end users actually contributing their vision of what they need, because in the end we're doing it for them, not for us or as a government. And to make it happen, I've learned that you need to have this kind of body either under the Prime Minister's office or this kind of collective body that connects these different state institutions, kind of the project managers, because as you mentioned before, if it's only one ministry who has this responsibility, it will never work. So it has to be coordinated in between to actually have full execution.
If you allow me, Mohammed, I wanted to back to the subject, which is about the service center. Actually here, when we talk about Saudi, we need to talk about the demography. Most of the people here, the population is very young, and between, let's say, 20 and 40. So that's make us think a lot. Shall we invest? Shall the government invest in service center or no? I'll just enlighten some example. Today we have what do we call it, single sign-on. And we have today around 14 million users, which is already using this single sign-on to log into different government agency, more than 40 or 45 government agency. And that's almost 40 to 50% of the population here in Saudi Arabia. So really we are thinking much, shall we invest on the service center or no? I give you another example, which is coming from the private sector.
Take questions from them.
So I give you another example from the private sector. One of the telecom company, they stopped the service, let's say, or showrooms in some of the cities for 2 or 3 days. And guess what? What happened? The conversion to the e-platform has been high, and the sales gone to the sky. So that gave us an indication that the society and the citizen is ready to have digital service. However, still we are thinking about the service center, but we need to digitize it. It shouldn't be the normal digital, the normal service center. The citizen should come there and have all of his service and all the service that he would like, he can implement it in one click.
Yeah. Thank you. Any questions from the audience? If not, any one of you have a question?
While waiting for... Oh, there is one. The app. Yeah.
The Slido.
I'll give you a mic. We're having some technical challenges with the app.
It's me. Is it me now? Okay, my question is, first let me just introduce myself. My name is Vincent Mabunda. I come from South Africa. I'm attached to the Department of Public Service and Administration. I'm interested in getting clear picture in terms of the life-centric approach that you presented earlier on. At the level of life-centric approach, how do we leverage on the existence of technology to ensure integratedness of our services? Let me put a practical example. Integrated in a fashion that we are able to trace the lifespan of an individual. Say, for instance, if somebody commits a crime, the police should not remain behind looking for that person whilst this person has already deceased. We're looking for something like that. It should, as the person is registered dead, it should clearly reflect throughout the government cycle. All the processes should indicate that this person has already passed on. The police should not remain behind looking for that person. The seamless integratedness of service. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to take that question?
Yeah.
Jessica?
I think if the question is really around how can technology and digital benefit life event design, I think it's all about understanding the context of what a user is trying to really do, what their goals are, and I think there's lots of examples across lots of these countries. I think it's useful to approach it from a broader angle, not just cutting across different departments inside a government, but potentially across private sector as well. Like when we designed our digital EID system, we were looking at a future state where the person could use that digital EID, like many countries, not just in their interactions with government, but across private sector as well, so that you're not actually applying for a passport in isolation. You're applying for a passport because you want to go on holiday. So your goal is you want to go on holiday. So holidays could be a life event. And then there's all sorts of interactions around getting visas and booking a car, finding somewhere to live while you're on holiday, booking a hotel or something, getting insurance. And they all, that's public sector, it's private sector. And as long as you take that broad approach of that live event, you're going to be able to use digital to kind of deliver a sort of much more seamless approach to those interactions. New Zealand have a really great example where they've developed
Start,
that brilliant app for people who've just had a child. And it unlocks access to all of these different services that government provides through this app in a way that, it's benefiting the users. It was hard for them to access those services.
I thought there was a question at the front. Can we get the mic?
Thank you very much. And I just heard a very interesting word about the data, which has been said that data is the new oil. Is the data a new oil or the new infrastructure? Is it something that kind of a public infrastructure that can generate new business, new services, and new models, or it's only an oil that we can monetize? So what's the best expression about the new data? Is it an oil or an infrastructure?
Well, I think that Saudi Arabia knows a thing or two about oil, right? Look, I think there's an element of data that is very similar to oil and that we need to think about very carefully, which is that data is an asset. It's an asset because it has value intrinsically, because it has flows and it has stocks, and it needs to be properly managed by the public sector because of that characteristic of being an asset, and an asset that is hugely undervalued and undermanaged currently in the public sector. That's one aspect in which it's like oil. But it also is similar to infrastructure in one dimension, which is that data is a public good, or some public data have the characteristic of a public good. So that, for instance, governments around the world have weather data. They have data about traffic patterns. They have data about all sorts of things that are hugely valuable if properly put at the disposal of the private sector, so that value can be created on the basis of that data. You can have weather apps, you can have traffic apps, you can have all sorts of apps that are providing services, private sector services, to citizens, provided what? You recognize the data you have, you manage it carefully, you put it out there on an open source, open data platform with appropriate stewardship and appropriate protection for personalized and individual data. If you do that, then you can create the ecosystem and the companies and the local job content that you really want to get as part of a side effect, a really huge benefit of digital transformation in the public sector.
Great. Take one or two more questions. Please, can we have the mic?
Thank you very much. I want to ask Mr. Adel, if you have plans to include the citizen in the designing e-government programs, not only feedback. My second question to any of your colleagues, what's the recommended researches in field of improving the e-government services? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. Yes, we are involving the citizen, the developer, even from outside the government, and we had a hackathon before, I think, 1 month, and we introduced a couple of challenges on the government in health, in commerce, and different area of the government. And we let the citizen to come and design the service for them needs. So yes, we are doing that, and also there is a lot of going on to receive the feedback from the government and receive the feedback from the citizen regarding the government service and how they are acting. And also we are planning to have an e-participation platform where we will give the opportunity for the citizen and the expat to participate in policy and regulation making on the government.
Thank you. Any other questions before we close this session? Just one more question, please. Thank you. This over here.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم.
السلام.
الحقيقة في in the introductory movie there was a phrase that says putting people first, which is I thought was more suitable for the form. Second thing is why we are putting the IT professional, you know, more responsible for having people first. Why we are going toward the IT professional, not for the social or the FEBs of the sector, the public sectors, or the organizations.
Okay. Would like to take that?
I can talk about the UK. I think there's a session later on about skills and capability, but to be super clear, we operate in a multidisciplinary way. That was true in 2010, and so what that means is that we recognize that it takes all sorts of different skills in order to deliver something that's genuinely valuable and works for users. So long gone are the days where it's, you know, a person who a solution architect alone, like establishing how to do this work. And I think there was a very deliberate decision in the UK in 2010 to establish Mike Bracken at the time as the head of government digital services and have the CTO for government report into that role, because we were trying to establish that technology is one of the tools that helps you deliver digital services and transformation.
Great. Thank you. I would like to thank you all for taking part in this panel discussion on a topic which is extremely important for all of us. We all are citizens at the end of the day, and we all are also in positions where we can influence and make a change to the life of citizens. Thank you, Renaud. Thank you, Jessica, Ott, Michael, and Adil.
Thank you.
Appreciate your contributions.
Thank you. Thank you.